Hey, you've made it to SprySpace, where people managing social media accounts come for community. This year, our focus is social media for good. Together, we can work to make social media a landscape for healthy online communities to grow. Sound good? Then come along with us on the SprySpace podcast, where we share what we know, learn what we don't, and strive to make social media better for us all. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SprySpace podcast. I'm Lacey, and we've got Adrian here today. We are continuing through the month of September on our film review month. So this month, we're just reviewing any films, well, not all of them, but we're reviewing four of them around the internet or social media. And today, Adrian and I are talking about The Social Dilemma. So this is one that we've talked about a few times on this podcast before, and we're excited to revisit from a new angle. Adrian, how are you today?
I am great.
I like to hear that. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
Before we get into the meat of it, tell me about a piece of social media content that you've taken in recently that's brought you joy.
Well, a piece of social media content that has brought me joy is really this new account that I found on Instagram. It's at Work and Social, they said. Whoever is behind this account is truly a social media manager because every single meme they post is just spot on. For instance, the most recent one is a photo of a man bowing at the end of an acting scene, and the caption says "and scene," so the scene is ending, right? And the caption says, you know, social media managers after a long week of being nice to everyone on the internet.
Like, you've done your acting job. End scene. You can go home and be a normal human now.
Yeah. Well, I haven't told you before, and I've told a few people that I see social media management as being like an actor. Like, you are performing a role for several different brands all day long, and you are acting online and you in the written form. So yeah, by the time Friday comes around, it's like you are done being nice to people on the internet.
It's true. I just don't want to have to talk anymore. You know, I spend the days teaching people how to not sound creepy, asking questions to strangers on the internet while they do their presence management. And then I just don't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's true. So anyway, that brings me joy in like a weird way, I guess.
You feel seen.
I do. I feel seen for sure.
And seen. Okay. So let's go into the social dilemma. So we've looked at this from a few different angles. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the amount of representation that is or is not in kind of the design and development of these apps and what that means for everybody who uses them. So let's start with just who designed and built, these major social media apps that we're using right now. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. Who were the primary designers of these, Adrian?
Yeah. Before we get into that, Lacey.
Okay, take me back.
Can we go back a little bit, one moment?
Okay.
More than 10 years ago, I graduated with my bachelor's degree in film. And so I was going to say that we could bring this even farther back around and talk about film a little bit. I mean, so The Social Dilemma, I actually didn't look up who created and produced The Social Dilemma, but generally with every single time you review a film, when you're in the film review world, and any good person who consumes any sort of media, whether it is film, fiction, or it is a newscast or podcast or anything, you always go back to who made it. Who was the person who made it, right? So when we talk about films and the subject matter, we really need to talk about who created this, right? So when we talk about who created social media, these different Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of these.
Oh, I guess Google, YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Google, anything in media. And I think that people forget that these are creative, these are imaginative, creative creations. They're not just I mean, they are math. They are a bunch of like math equations, but there is a element of a wonderful creativity in all of these apps, right? But I think that people really forget about kind of taking a good look at who created them in the first place. Like, you know, when you have artists or filmmakers where people really dive into who created it, who did this. With technology, sometimes I think the technology is so fascinating and amazing. People are just like, hey,
They
this
like
thing's
forget that
amazing.
they forget
Yeah.
that it was something that was actually had to be thought up and created.
Right, by a human. So, anyway,
So, who
That's-
are
that's
primarily
my-
the humans?
after that preamble, right? Well, if we want to talk about like the big one, we got Mark Zuckerberg, right, with Facebook, created in 2004. At Harvard, right?
Yep.
Like, you know, think about it when you're in college. Think about when you were in college, Lacey. Like, what was it like in college? Like, what was it like being like 18, 19 years old and just,
I
you know,
cared a lot.
2004.
I cared
Yeah.
a lot about what other people thought about me. I wasn't sure, you know, it was my first time not being in the security of my family and having to be myself for the first time in a big group of people, and I cared a lot about what other people thought about me and the validation of what it meant to get good grades, to look good. Yeah, that was me.
Right? And so we think about Mark Zuckerberg being a young man and at Harvard, and you know, he was super smart. Obviously, he's smart. He built this amazing website, all that. But if you think about it, like his brain wasn't even done forming, and he creates this thing that like just catches on and goes wild before, you know, he's even like adult enough to wonder, is this even a
Should
good
I?
idea? Should I do this? Yeah, no, that did not happen. And so this is a great question to kind of like ponder.
Yeah, and when you look into most of the people, there was some other representation on the social dilemma, but the majority of the people who were founding members of these programs, these apps, these startups as they were at that time, they're primarily white males in their 20s.
Yes.
Even down to the developers, right? The people who are actually writing the code for it every day. They talk about how the people who were creating Gmail, there's, you know, there's this group of primarily white male developers, coders living in Southern California, who, as they are writing code, they are impacting 1 billion people who use that app every day. And so how does that lack of representation from a coding standpoint actually inform the user experience?
Yeah. Think about it. Like Google was created by Stanford computer science graduate students. If you think about Snapchat was invented by I think he was still in high school, the inventor of Snapchat. I can't remember Instagram's founder, but it was bought by Facebook. Yeah, it's a very young, white, male, privileged group. You know, and if you think about it, you know, everybody has computers now. Everyone, you know, if you wanted to create, you wanted to code on the internet, you need to have certain things. You need to have a certain, you need to have money to pay for a computer. You know, it is the wonderful thing about the internet is the bar is rather low for entry. Like you can go to the library and be on the internet on the library. But let's be real. Let's be honest. Like the people who were building everything in the early stages were already leaps and bounds ahead of many of their, you know, people that are the same age.
In regards to privilege.
In regards to privilege. You know, I mean, you and I both went to college. We have a certain level of privilege as well. Like when I grew up, I knew I was going to go to college. I knew that I would there's a certain path in life for me. And so when you are constantly in a bubble of people that are always like you or always thinking like you just think that the world is like that, right? You know, in these people's minds when they created these apps, like they, you know, in their brains and, you know, in their bubble, like the world, I mean, why would they not create these things? They probably had people around them being like, "This is amazing. You're awesome. You're creative. It's amazing," and not really thinking about questions of accessibility or inclusivity or it's kind of like the world. You know how cars, for example, more women die in car crashes because the crash test dummies are made to be a man size. So all the safety features are designed with one type of person in mind. Therefore, if somebody doesn't have that same profile, it gets left behind. So.
And what I found a lot, which to be honest is really in line with a lot of late teens, early 20s people, is that the platforms, even though today they're used and touted as a form of human connection, and I mean that's what we view when we ask anybody what it's for. They use it to connect with people. But the thing about it is the people who were creating these in their late teens, early 20s weren't creating them for like a gift for humanity to connect with each other. It was bought by investors. It was created for profit, and people who were using the platform are then dehumanized as users and revenue generators, right?
Yep.
They have this line where they talk about the guy who was the director of growth for Facebook. They would talk about it as if there was this dial that like they could turn up monetization a little bit today. Oh, we want more users in Korea today, so we're going to dial that up. And that Mark was the one holding that dial. Okay. So like none of the people who are actually using this to connect were thought of as people. They were thought of as users. They were thought of as something that was generating profit.
Yeah. No, I mean, in that kind of, it's almost like, this thing has been created by people who, aren't completely like spiritually developed or mature, like, yeah, we are all numbers to them. We are, every little piece of data for us is a way for them to make money.
Yes.
Like that's it. Like they have monetized all of our data. So, honestly, like the fact that like, people commit suicide, they have low self-esteem, we have mental health issues, we have all of these, we have conspiracy theory groups, we have, all of these big questions that come out of social media, like that's like, oh, like that just comes with the territory of like getting all this fun data. Like that's just like part of it, and one thing that I think was really interesting, I remember back in the day, back probably like 2008, 2007, I can't remember when, but there was this point at Facebook where it was like you have this like questions of constitutionality, right? Like Facebook could go in and decide to shut down certain types of communication, certain types of expression. They do that now. They've always done that, but they could have been had a lot more stronger stance on certain behaviors, right? But then you have like, the First Amendment, freedom of speech. You have all of these legal, like constitutional questions involved. And it almost was kind of like a point where it was like, they could have just been like, you know what, this has been a fun activity. We're just going to stop. But this is, we're going to start getting into this, like, of us being the police for this information, and we're going to basically decide that, we're not liable for anything that you all do on here. And so they kind of created this environment where, they didn't have to police anything, but there was kind of this moment where I do remember it happening, where they were just like, well, they had to make a choice whether to keep on going or to stop, or like make it not as profitable. So.
Right. And, as we talk about this in some of our social media for good forums, I've seen a couple times in the chat section of people who are attending, other social media managers, write in the question, which I'm going to pose to you now, which is, if this is true, we're using this as a form of human connection. There's so much complication in it, and it wasn't made with humans really in mind. Are we better off without it? Would we be better without it? Okay, what do you think? Should social media have gone by the wayside? Would we be better off without it? Where do we go from here? What do you think?
Well, I think from a health standpoint, yeah, I think we are better off without social media. The aggravating part is that you can't uninvent it. It's here. You cannot uninvent it. A quick little story. My husband and I were driving up in the mountains this weekend in the Pacific Northwest here. And there's a section of the highway that we were on where the Pacific Crest Trail goes through. So the PCT goes from Canada all the way down to Mexico. And you have these folks, PCTers, right? And they take months out of their year and they hike the whole thing. Cheryl Strayed has a whole book on it called Into the Wild, I believe. Anyway, I think it's called Wild. No, it's not Into the Wild. Anyway,
okay,
it's a whole thing. And we picked up a hitchhiker, and he was obviously a hiker. Like, he was a PCT fellow, and he was getting it right into town. He got new boots shipped to him from like his parents. He was going to the local post office in this little mountain town, and so we pick up this guy, and he was delightful. He was amazing, and we drive into this little mountain town, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And he was telling us all these stories about how this whole trip for him had restored his faith in humanity. And part of me wonders, after talking to him, was that he had to be present every single day, like being out on the trail. You have to be present. You don't have hours of scrolling and comparing yourself and thinking about what you're going to buy and thinking about like your future, like worrying about your 5-year plan. Like, you don't do that at all. When you're backpacking, you're literally in the moment, right? And he was just like, it was such a breath of fresh air. And he said that this whole trip for him had restored his faith in humanity, and he thanked us. And so I was like, oh, that's what it's like without social media. So I don't know. I do think it would be a better place without it. The question is how.
I do think there are quite a few pieces, though, that make me argue the opposite, which is that, I mean, social media has brought in so much. It really has brought in so many people who have been isolated in the past. People in domestic violence situations, people who are in other countries that don't have access to community or information around their health and whatnot, and has brought that information to them and a sense of community to people who haven't had it. And so I would argue that I would rather social media stay. I would just rather it be different, right? So,
yeah.
and that leaves us with where there are a couple options, right? Mm-hmm. Do we keep social media exactly as it is? Do we get rid of it completely? Or could we redesign it in a way that was actually beneficial and human focused instead of profit focused?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the only way out of this. We can't uninvent it. We can't get rid of it. I do think at this point, I say it would be better without social media. It would. But I do also feel like, you always see on social media, like people announcing, I'm taking a hiatus from social media. I'm just logging
with
off,
the social media post.
Yes, with the social media post. Like, if you want me, I will only log in once a week now, and like announcing their new social media like habits for the world to see, which is fine. I mean, sometimes you need to have new habits. That's fine. But I do think that there's a certain level of privilege that comes with that too. Like, you are privileged enough. Like, you have a job that doesn't rely on social media. Like, you have a secure, you don't have to watch the news every single day. You're not a, person of color. You're not a marginalized person. You are not at war. There's certain things where you're like, you are privileged enough that you're just like, I am not going to be here. I'm not going to show up as like a potential leader within the space, right? You're just going to like leave and then come back, which is fine. You have to like protect your mental health. Like, you have to do that. But I do think that there is, obviously, you need to be on there and come off, but it's kind of a responsibility too. Like, I kind of feel like we need responsible adults to come into the room and like kind of help lead the way, because right now it's a trash mess.
Yeah, you can, if you have the privilege to just wash your hands of it and walk away, that is a privilege. If you are marginalized, this is a space where you're creating forward momentum for the causes that are bringing you closer to equality.
Totally.
So how do we, from users, we only have so much we can do, right? So we can show up, like you're saying, as digital leaders, and we can, take in information, and we can try to help the people who we know and love to not be hit with misinformation. We can talk about causes that are important and not just pumpkin spice latte season. But I think it takes something from a programmer and coding standpoint that would actually make a difference here, like better representation in these businesses. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it. Like, Google goes to college campuses, like, UC campuses. They go to UW campuses. They go directly to very good schools. They go directly to those four-year colleges. They recruit computer science kids directly out of those schools. And so people who are already privileged enough to go have a university education, which is a four-year university in America right now, we all know it's very expensive. And so you basically have this pipeline of people who, obviously are super smart, and that's awesome. And I know they worked super hard to get there, but they don't have any other, it's like that is the only pool of people they're getting. Like predominantly people from higher education, they go straight into their pipeline for programmers and developers. And I know that we can do better. The amount of knowledge and brilliance of the young people of America, like from all backgrounds, from all high schools and schools, they could easily learn how to learn simple developer coding, programming, be on UX teams, be on research teams. Instagram already makes a ton of money off of young Instagram influencers, selling stuff. But like, why do they have like people like building it that are come from various backgrounds? They need to have a diverse workforce. And the thing about that is like that doesn't, like, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of those efforts that they do that can seem performative, like, for me, are performative until you actually can say, oh, our entire workforce represents, like, the country, which is very diverse. Like, I don't know. It's just, like, for me, and just, like, you have to find young talent, not from specific places that are just kind of, like, the cream of the crop, because like the cream of the crop have been there. They're there for certain reasons. Like,
yeah. And then also just being so mindful of who's in leadership positions, right? Who are all of these directors of departments that are making the decisions that trickle down there. It doesn't matter if the people that are just doing what they're told, well, it does matter, but it matters as well to make sure that people who are in these higher director type positions are also much more reflective of the actual user base, the community that this business is built around and uses and stands upon the back of.
Exactly. Not only do we need developers and the people that are building the thing to be diverse, we also need to understand that, like, the technology surrounds us. It really does. I mean, we have the the Internet of Things is what they call it, right? They have the smart thermostats. You have everyone has a little camera on their door, right? Everybody. We don't need to put cameras, like, how people were like worried about like Orwell or whatever, Big Brother watching you and they're going to come and watch you. We've already put them in our house voluntarily. Like, it's already there. There's like all of these very interesting parts of technology that are like ingrained into our life, and like, now how do we kind of extricate out of that? The thing that I think is lost and hasn't, I think that they try like at the end now, the last couple of years, that they've tried to like patch it up, but like philosophically and ethically, Do they have like a head philosopher or a person who is like ethics director, or maybe a third party, maybe an outside third party that like comes in and is just like, hey, do you think we really need this feature? Do we think we really need Facebook for children, which they were trying to develop? Like they announced a couple of weeks ago. Like, do we think that this is a good idea?
I even think if there was like an ethicist or a philosophist on staff, this whole, in the last 6 months where Apple did the new update that allows you to just, all it does is it allows you to choose if you want to be tracked on other apps. Okay, so it pops up and it says allow or ask app not to track, which basically is that Facebook was using any open apps and getting data from all of those other apps and your activity on all of those other apps to better serve your ads, right?
Yeah.
And so they're so terrified. There was this huge 6-month campaign against Apple about how this was going to negatively impact small businesses who focus on the advertising of Facebook. And it's like, you are so, you've pushed yourself so into a corner that if you don't get this exorbitant amount of data from people, you're so scared of people having choice. Like, make a product that people will choose to push that button. Don't do this whole smear campaign against Apple for giving people the option to choose. How does that make sense philosophically?
Yeah.
That makes me very mad. I say no to all of them. I mean, I don't know what other people do, but like I'm happy with getting some ads that could be perhaps less relevant to me.
Right.
Choosing which apps I'm giving my data through.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they've gotten around this, but years ago, you know how when you have an app, you download an app and then it says, log in with your email or log in with Facebook. You can like use the same login kind of token of like Facebook or Google or whatever. If you use like the Facebook token, I mean, that just gives them even more data for you. So like, every single app, if you have like, let's say 20 apps on your phone that you use all the time, that could be potentially 20 different portals into your life that Facebook has access to for like 20 different things, like, shopping. Maybe you have a fitness tracker, maybe you have, and not only is like the fitness tracker company tracking your data, but also Facebook is tracking your data, and also like Google is tracking your data. So it's just like, and at a certain point, like they're going to get it. Like, that's the thing though. At a certain point, they're going to get it. They're going to get it anyway, because all of us are trying to keep up with like what they're doing, and they have squadrons, like I'm saying, squadrons of people, developers coming in that like all they do is like try to figure out how to like get your stuff.
I think maybe one of the most frustrating things for me as we're talking about this is it is such a colonial mindset. It's like, how do we take over as much as possible and profit as much as possible off other people? And from a philosophical standpoint, the human beings, we know in our hearts that our job is to serve and love and connect. And so I don't know what it is that creates this colonial mindset overall where people are trying to control and squeeze other people for their benefit.
Yep. You don't know what that is?
I don't, because it's not, I mean, I was going to say it's not in me, but I'm sure that there are lots of ways that it is, and I'm just, not as aware of it. But the fact that I asked the question, I think, is a difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just capitalism straight up. But I think that there's this fascinating book that I'm reading called oh gosh, now I'm blanking on the name of it, but basically it talks about how our online data is like a whole new, basically wild west of capitalism, where it's like an unending well of wealth as long as you can pick those data points. And the amount of data that all of these companies have on us is is astounding. I mean, even if you have a flip phone these days, even if you have a flip phone and you're not like connected to the internet, like as like a Facebook user, let's say, again, how many times have you been on someone else's like ring light or not ring, but the
Nest.
Yes, the Nest. If you are a delivery driver, if you are have ever been in a public, like, you know, Walmart or just any public space, like how many, and the ability to recognize faces, even if you don't have an account on Facebook, Facebook probably knows that you exist.
Well, because they've already bought all of the credit card data. And so, you know, they know what people purchase. They know when people purchase things, from where people purchase things. And as soon as you create an account, then they can tie those things together. But you're totally right.
Yep. Also, I mean, Facebook can triangulate, like, you know, let's say you and I had a friend who did not have Facebook at all, but we both had their number in our phones. So Facebook now knows we have, you know, Jane Smith, you know, Lacey and Adrian have Jane Smith and her phone number is this number, and Facebook is going to be like, okay, well, whenever that profile fitting that description, you know, gets a new Gmail address, or, you know, somehow they can link up so many things, and then it can also figure out, okay, well, like these 3 people with these 3 cell phone numbers are all in the same place geographically. They know everything. I just like, I wish I could scream at people how creepy it is. Truly creepy on so many levels.
And there are other ways of doing things, you know, like, I know you and I were both reading the book Braiding Sweetgrass right now, which talks immensely about kind of the indigenous ideology of the law of reciprocity, which basically means when you give and serve and work together with other, could be plant species, could be animal species, could be human species. When you give without expectation and you work together, then you get back. It's like the opposite of capitalism. Yeah. You know, and that worked for people. That has the capacity to work. So this idea of capitalism that has caused so many humans to be turned into users and profit generators, it doesn't have to be that way. But in order for it not to be that way, there has to be other people inside the systems that are being created and taking so much control of us here.
And they have to give up. They have to give it up. They have to give up something that they really love. It's so true. And we can't have this technology. Like, you know, it's like that's the crazy thing. These are just made up of ones and zeros.
Yes.
like we are the ones that put on all of our philosophies, all of our user experience, behavior, all of our, ingrained, all of our ingrained ideologies. We're the ones that put that in here. But this is really just a bunch of ones and zeros. So we could really do whatever we wanted to.
Let's keep talking about it, you know? Keep reimagining and inspiring. I hope we can just keep inspiring the young people who are coming up in this generation too, to at least we're waking up to the destructive nature of things, and perhaps we can have the next generation solve all our problems.
Yeah. No. I think lastly, the other thing that we really need is we need younger people in politics that help shape policy around the digital realm, because there's like, you and I could argue about like regulation, whether or not that's good or bad or whatever, but I will say that there are people right now who are making decisions and policies on the digital world that
they don't understand it.
They have no, like, I mean, how could they? I mean, you and I barely know, and we're literally, this is all we do for work. So it's like, I think that's why it scares me so much, is that there is this like, these kind of what the high castles of like of people that control so much, and we don't really even comprehend it. And then we have other people that are trying to like maybe do something good and or bring some egalitarianism to it. But anyway, I just think that there should be a better representation all around for that, but especially for digital reasons. Like, that would be great if there were some millennials
Yeah,
that were helping to shape policy.
I agree.
That's all I think.
Bring more technical understanding into legislature.
That'd be great for everything, because, I mean, honestly, politicians don't know very much about a lot of things that they rule on, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I feel like we talked around all the issues as much as we possibly could.
We
I don't know if
did.
we really make movement on anything in what we're saying, but, at least we've talked around the issues.
And also, we did not really specifically talk about the film, The Social Dilemma, but this was a great tangent to go off of, inspired by The Social Dilemma. And we did start with a framework of, like, talking about, like, all of this stuff as who the creators are.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more about the actual Netflix special, The Social Dilemma, we have a couple other podcasts that we talk about it. So if you're looking at SprySpace podcast on whatever your podcast place is, you can search The Social Dilemma in our episodes and find some of these as well. So I want to close out with our last question, which is, how are you doing with social media? If our focus is social media for good and we're trying to move all sorts of different issues forward, it doesn't help much unless we're kind of moving our personal issues forward too. So how are you doing with social media right now?
I'm doing really well. I recently have moved to a new living situation. My husband and I are building a house, but it's not finished yet. So right now we're living with family, and it's a little bit chaotic. And so I've really leaned into the things I've learned. I think during the COVID times, I've really created some new routines for myself and tried to take care of myself mentally. And that really means I have your priorities of things that you need to do. And right now I'm figuring out my routines for my priorities. And I just realized the other day, I'm like, man, I haven't really been on social media that much because I'm with my family a lot more, and which is amazing. But I'm also like taking care of other things like, my pets and my exercise and making good meals and all that. So it takes a little bit longer because we're getting into a new routine, but that also means that it's less social media time. And I realized that was pretty good.
You've done such a good job. You've been such a good example to everybody at Spry, I think. When we started coming up with what some of these good, positive mental health boundaries were for social media, you've implemented them and kept them for going on a year now. And that's been huge. It's been huge. You've been a good example to me, too. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Lacey. I think it really hit home when my eyes started to just get super tired. And I'm just like, man, I'm in my 30s. Like, I can't keep on, my eyeballs cannot do this. Something needs to happen because I like my eyes. I like them. They're pretty awesome.
The philosophist and ethicist in your head was like, I think something should change.
Yes. We can't go on the way we're going on. So.
Well, if you enjoyed this and you want to keep talking about it with us, you can find us in SprySpace, which is our Facebook group.
Yep.
You can follow us on any of our social channels at Think Spry. You could just meditate for 10 minutes and the answers of the world might come to you.
Yeah, we want to know what you think.
You could also check out, we just launched a course called Social Media on Purpose, which one of the big things that bring good mental health is just making sure that we're doing our social media job on purpose. We're not flopping around wondering what is and is going to be successful. Right. And this can help you a lot. So
yeah.
Adrienne, thank you so much for your time and for chatting with me for a while. And thank you, those of you who are listening. And we hope that you are using social media for good and that you will keep learning.
Keep on going. Bye.
This SprySpace podcast is brought to you by Spry Social Media Marketing, Digital Marketing Agility. Edited by Chad Hinman and executive produced by Lacey Fott.